Hi, this is the first post-apocalyptic, post-Trumpian apocalyptic lecture for the advanced creative writing courses at City Lit, coming to you from California. This is my office here in California, where I'm awaiting the end of the world, basically, and I'm using my old computer. I know this is of endless fascination to you, but I'm using my old desktop computer. It's plugged into 8-9 wires. It's old. When I look at myself giving this lecture, my lips are, I look like an old Steve Reeves Hercules movie, or those old 50s superhero movies. So if I seem more distracted than usual, it's A, the world is coming to an end, and B, my computer doesn't work. Okay, so I'm going to, the Hunger Games lecture topic this year, which, as you all know, concerns the fight to the death of the surviving members of the advanced course who must eliminate one another with tridents or cajolery if they don't want to use violence. And the winner gets to, we forge together a question from the winners who are left standing at the end of this violent Trumpian apocalyptic contest. And the subject this term is character motivation. Who gives a crap? That's my personal title. And it's a fairly loose, this is going to be very loose and very informal because the world's coming to an end, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time preparing these lectures since we may not survive to watch them. But one of the issues of creative writing that drives me crazy is the way it's often taught like it's a scientific experiment where everyone has to sit down and draw charts of where their characters came from and what their motivational status is and why they got married and what their favorite color is. And there's always these exercises in creative writing courses that my students bring to me to show me what they learned in previous classes, which I find completely useless. And the useless aspect of writing fiction to me is trying to imagine what your characters were like before the story started. I think this is if I can articulate it clearly, that's the best I can do. Too often, people who aren't experienced as writers or readers obsess about the backstory of their characters. I've talked about this a lot. They're endlessly obsessed with where their characters, what happened to their characters before the story started and how they got there and what their parents told them and where they came from and where they went to school. And readers just don't give a crap about that stuff. And only maybe some creative writing teachers somewhere in Mars or something obsess about teaching their students how to do this. But what you need to really learn is where your stories start. I've said this endlessly, I know, but where the hell the story starts. Now, where your characters are and what they want at the beginning of the story is what's going to drive your novel or your short story. Okay? Knowing what they did when they were babies isn't going to help. It's a figment. Fiction is a fantasy that we generate and we try to control so that we can entertain readers and ourselves as we read the story or write the story. I just thought I would pick 2 or 3 stories out of our text, our kind of recurring text, and we just use it simply because there's a lot of different writers in it, and we can sort of use them as examples. I want to go to a couple of stories that we've looked at many times. For example, we've often talked about the Gateskill story. But let's think about motivation and whether the characters, the writers, sat down and said, well, what's the motivation? You heard this in bad theater productions. People say, what's my motivation for waiting for something to happen? What we really want to do is what they're doing on stage when the story starts. And when the story starts, you'll remember this wonderful opening from Braverman where she just gets the hell to pass this woman out of the way as fast as she can. It was the oh, wait a second, I'm in the wrong story here. I'm looking at the Braverman story. This is very informal. Okay. It was the 5th month of her sobriety. I'm talking about Tall Tales in the Mekong Delta. It was after a divorce. It was autumn. Now, we may learn some information about this woman. And we've gotten some background that she's been an addict and she's divorced, blah, blah. What matters is none of that. what you could throw that out. I still argue this a lot. Almost all that backstory you can just throw away, and the story would still work. Not as well as it does, but it would still work. And the reason it would still work is as soon as she enters the story, and as soon as that crazy Lenny shows up, she reacts to him consistently. She has an attitude towards him. She stays out of the way, really, so he sort of drives the story. But her character is clear. She doesn't want trouble. She doesn't want to be near this guy, but she doesn't want to run away either. She's interested in him enough to listen to him. And when we do go off into little interior fugues of this character, they're consistent with the character at the beginning. The writer is not sitting there trying to explain why she does all this stuff in her head. She's trying to make her dramatically interesting from the first scene to the last. Now, once she's established those peculiarities of her character, those are the front story. And this is where you really got to be all the time, the front story. And I will go over this never-endingly. When the stories fall apart, when we're bored reading each other's stories, when we're bored writing our stories, we are mired in this explanatory what happened to our characters and why they did things. We want to see the story happen. Let's look at a very different story. And again, you can think of the Dubu story, the fat girl. In many ways, there's certain similar stylistic qualities to that story with the Oates story. We don't need to start when the woman is 25, 30 years old or after a divorce. We can start when the characters are young. Make that decision early. Don't start when they're 45 and then spend the story telling what happened before. But if you want to start with a character at a significant moment of their life, it's always an interesting place for a longer time frame. The Braveman story is over a short time frame. It's over a few weeks or months. But if you look at the fat girl, or you look at the Oates story in a way, you have two different sorts of structures. Both of them start when the characters are fairly youngish. So there's a significant childhood moment, which is, of course, the moment that when Louise was 9 and she's being told she eats too much. Okay. Now, we're not going to stay at 9, but there's a moment that's significant to the girl. It's maybe the moment that she remembers that she remembers it's strongest in her life about recognizing that she's got a weight problem. And we start there, and we really carry that forward to high school, to college. And there's motivation is not something that is happening here. It's a character who wants something, who's driven to get thinner, to not be lonely. Those aren't hard things. Those aren't difficult motivations to understand for any of us. And to make connections with other people. And that this weight thing is one of the main things on our mind. Now, you don't need to work that out on graph paper. You need to recognize that this is something that interests you about your character, and then drive that forward. So what I'm worried about is the term motivation. People start to psychologize, and they start doing all the wrong things in storytelling. The Three Little Pigs, we don't really give a goddamn why they built their fucking houses. Okay? They built the damn houses, and then the wolf comes along. You got to get the need for security in a house. You don't have to spend a long time on. So motivation is something that it's in that deep psychology of your characters that we can sort of connect to. You want to understand your character, but you need to start. Most of that has got to be a sort of instinctive sense, writing it out on graph paper and understanding and being able to answer all these questions about my character does this because da da da. That's for some sort of a physics exam. It's not for telling a story. So if you look at that in the Oates story, what often happens is they might start early in the character's life, and they drive it through their life. So we go through many years of their life in the short story or the novel. But you'll see how quickly all the writers will get to a specific period. In the fat girl, the period of her diet. In Oates' story, the moment that weird kid shows up at her front door. And the motivations of the characters are not hard to understand. If you start off a story and you don't know what your character wants or what they're doing in that story, then you just throw it away. It doesn't matter what you do with that. You can't do anything with that story. You may have to start thinking about something else. Too often, I think, people start saying, well, I have this great idea, I'm going to write this story, and blah, 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 and then they start it and they realize, well, I don't know who the character is. This is a very common problem. And you could spend months drawing pictures of that character. It's not going to help you make the story work. You're going to have to go. You really got to go find that character that makes any story work, and stop trying to fit these square pegs into round holes. So if you have the story and you don't have the character, you don't have a story. And the character is somebody you know, you can identify with, you can understand, particularly what they want and where they want to go. The very first sentence of the story. Not where they're going to go at the end of the story, but where they want to go at the beginning of the story. And then finding the situation that makes them move. So you're going to have that happen in novels, you're going to have it happen in short stories. And I think motivation is, again, it's just one of those terms, like foreshadowing. Whenever a piece is, something's not working, students always say, oh, I'm foreshadowing. No, you're not. You're just wasting, you're spilling time foreshadowing. You haven't got the front story yet. And foreshadowing is something for literature professors to talk about. You're trying to tell a story where we know what happens now, not what is going to happen later. Okay? So that's my harangue on motivation. Who needs it? Or screw motivation, or stop worrying about goddamn motivation. Where's your character? What do they want next? That's what you should think about. Okay, I hope we survive to play this next year. This is year one of the Trumpian apocalypse, and we will see how many years we can still show these old videos. Okay, bye.